The pre-posting briefing on the Sorving had been thorough in the specific way of briefings that covered the structural elements of a culture accurately and the experiential elements insufficiently, which was the way of most pre-posting briefings about species whose cultural practices had not yet been extensively documented through direct long-term contact. Iran had read it completely. He had read about the twin bond, the Sorving's foundational social characteristic, the biological and psychological pairing that produced every Sorving individual as one of a bonded pair, the pair that was the basic unit of Sorving social structure from which all other relationships were understood and measured. He had read about the ways the twin bond shaped Sorving communication, the specific register in which twins addressed each other that was different from the register used with non-twins, the shared reference framework that twins developed across a lifetime of the bond, the specific quality of Sorving social interactions as interactions between pairs rather than individuals. He had read about the Sorving partnership tradition, the tradition by which a twin-bonded pair formed significant relationships with non-twins, which were relationships of specific cultural weight, and which the briefing described as complex and governed by tradition, without providing the specific details of the complexity or the tradition. The specific details of the complexity and the tradition were the gap in the briefing. He had noted the gap and had proceeded with the understanding that the gap would be filled by the direct experience of the posting, which was how gaps in pre-posting briefings were typically filled. He had been at Orbital Station Varath 7 for 3 weeks. The station was the Joint Authority's dedicated cultural exchange facility in the Frontier Zone's Inner System Cluster. A functional station with the specific quality of a place built for the purpose of people from different backgrounds spending time together, which meant it had the communal spaces and the shared facilities, and the schedule structures that the exchange function required. And it had the quality of a place that was not anyone's home, but was comfortable enough to be the site of genuine exchange rather than performed exchange. Thessaly and Veen Sarath were 27 years old. He had been working with them for 3 weeks, and he had developed, in 3 weeks, the specific reading of them that sustained attentive contact produced. They were excellent at their function, the cultural observation and documentation that their assignment required, with the specific quality of people who found what they were observing genuinely interesting, which was the quality that made the difference between documentation and understanding. They were also, in the specific quality of the twin bond's expression, interesting to observe themselves. The way they communicated with each other had the specific quality of the briefing's description, the different register, the shared reference framework, the efficiency of 2 people who had been in each other's company for 27 years, and the way they communicated with him had the quality of people who were genuinely curious about the person they were communicating with rather than about the category of person he represented. He had been finding the posting genuinely interesting. The meal in the 3rd week's middle was a common dining area meal, the standard shared meal that the exchange mission's schedule provided for the informal cultural exchange that the formal sessions couldn't produce, the meal that was the occasion for the conversation that was not the agenda's conversation, but was often the exchange's most significant conversation. Thessaly and Veen had been describing the Sorving partnership tradition's early stages, the observation period, the documentation that the tradition required, the specific activities that the early stage involved. He had been listening with the quality of someone who was genuinely interested in the material and who was also, as the cultural liaison officer, filing the material in the function's relevant categories. He said, "Well, I'm single, so I don't have direct experience with what you're describing, but it sounds like the early stage is primarily about building the shared reference framework that the partnership requires. Is that the function it's serving?" The conversation continued. He did not know that the statement had been something other than a conversational contribution. He noticed, in the meal's remaining minutes, that Thessaly and Veen exchanged a look. The look was the specific exchange of two people who had been in each other's company for 27 years, and who were communicating something with the efficiency that 27 years of the bond produced. The exchange was brief, a second, perhaps two, and was not directed at him. He filed it as the twins communicating about something in the way twins communicated. He did not yet know what the something was. The shift in Thessaly and Vine's engagement quality was present from the following morning. He noticed it the way he noticed things, not immediately, but with the accumulation of observations that his specific attentiveness produced. The first observation was the quality of their questions at the morning's cultural exchange session. The questions had a different character from the previous 3 weeks' questions, which had been the cultural observation questions. Questions about human cultural practices, institutional structures, social frameworks, the material of the documentation they were building. The morning's questions were about him, not about human cultural practices as he experienced them, about him as the person experiencing them. What had produced his interest in the cultural liaison function? What he found difficult about the posting? Whether the difficulty was the same kind of difficulty he found in other significant undertakings or a different kind. He answered the questions with the quality of someone who found the questions interesting and who was also, in the answering, noting that the questions were different from the previous 3 weeks' questions. He filed this as the observation expanding from the cultural category to the individual. The second observation came in the afternoon, when Vine proposed an activity that was outside the standard exchange mission schedule. She said, "There is a specific hour this evening when the Frontier Zone star cluster is at the optimal viewing angle from the station's observation deck. The Sorving cultural tradition has a practice of significant conversations at the observation of significant astronomical phenomena. We would like to conduct the practice with you." He said, "Yes." The observation deck at the star cluster's optimal viewing hour had the quality the briefing's description had not captured. The Frontier Zone's inner system cluster from the station's position was the specific visual quality of many older stars in proximity, the cool and dense light of systems that had been present before the current administrative framework and would be present after it. Thessaly and Vine were in the observation in the specific way of people for whom the phenomenon had cultural weight rather than only visual interest. They had the significant conversation the tradition required. The conversation was about significant choices, the choices that had produced the current situation for each of them, the choices whose consequences were the current life. He had talked about the choice to pursue the cultural liaison function rather than the technical function his initial training had prepared him for. They had talked about the choice to enter the diplomatic corps rather than the Sorving's academic tradition. The conversation had the quality of something genuine, the genuine exchange of people who were in a real conversation rather than a cultural exchange session. He filed this as genuinely interesting. He filed the activity itself as different from the previous 3 weeks' activities in a way I haven't categorized yet. The third observation came on the 4th day, when Thessaly proposed the collaborative meal. She said, "The Sorving culinary tradition has a preparation practice for significant occasions that involves the participants in the preparation, rather than in only the consumption. The preparation is the occasion rather than the meal being the occasion. We would like to conduct this practice with you." He said, "Yes." The collaborative meals preparation involved the combination of human and Sorving cooking traditions in the specific way of two traditions being applied to the same ingredients simultaneously, and the combination being negotiated in real time. It had the quality of an activity that revealed something about the people doing it in the specific way that activities requiring collaborative decision-making in unfamiliar territory revealed something, the approach to the unfamiliar, the response to the negotiation's friction, the humor or the absence of it in the moments of genuine uncertainty about whether the combination would produce something edible. It produced something edible. It also produced, in the preparation's 2 hours, the specific accumulated observation that the activity's design had been designed to produce, though he did not yet know that the activity had been designed to produce it. He was in the 5th day's morning session when the preliminary conclusion assembled. The preliminary conclusion was, the activities of the past 4 days have been intentional in a way that is different from the intentionality of the standard exchange mission's activities. The intentionality is directed at me specifically rather than at the cultural exchange function generally. The direction is building something, a picture, an assessment, a determination, whose purpose I have not yet identified. He went to Senior Cultural Officer Vel Morin. She was 53 years old and had been in the Joint Authorities Cultural Liaison function for 26 years and had been at the Cultural Exchange Mission for 2 months before his arrival. She had the quality of someone who had been in enough cross-cultural situations to know that the situations often contained elements that the pre-posting briefings had not covered. He said, "I want to ask you about the solving compatibility evaluation tradition." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "What specifically do you want to know?" He said, "I want to know if it's what I think it is." She said, "Describe what you think it is." He described the past 4 days. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "The pre-posting briefing section on the partnership tradition." He said, "Describe the early stage as involving specific activities without specifying the activities." She said, "Yes. The specific activities are the compatibility evaluation. The tradition is initiated by a declaration of availability." He said, "The declaration of availability." She said, "In the solving cultural framework, a person who is in the partnership tradition discussion context and who states their single status is declaring their availability for evaluation. The declaration is not casual in solving." He said, "I said I was single at the 3rd week's meal." She said, "Yes, I know. I was at the other end of the table," he said, "and the look they exchanged." She said, "I expect that was the decision." He said, "The decision to evaluate me." She said, "Yes." He said, "The evaluation is," he found the word, "significant." She said, "The solving compatibility evaluation is the tradition that precedes the partnership invitation." The partnership invitation is, the word is significant, yes. The tradition is designed to determine whether the person has the qualities the partnership requires, because the partnership is the relationship between the twins and a non-twin partner that the solving social structure has as its second foundational relationship. He said both of them. She said, "The solving partnership is not a relationship with one twin. It is a relationship with the twin-bonded pair as a unity. The partner is the partner of both." He said, "I want to understand this correctly before I talk to them." She said, "Yes. I think that's the right order." He said, "Tell me everything the briefing didn't." She told him. He had the clarifying conversation with Thessaly and Veen the following morning. He had prepared for it in the way he prepared for significant conversations, thinking through the structure of what he needed to communicate and what he needed to receive, not to script the conversation, but to be clear about what the conversation was for and what it required from him to fulfill that function. What it required was the direct statement of what he understood, the direct question about whether his understanding was correct, and the direct willingness to be in the answer's presence regardless of what the answer was. He found them in the observation documentation room, the room they used for the compilation of their daily documentation, which was where they were in the morning hours before the exchange mission's scheduled sessions. He said, "I want to have a conversation that is not the exchange session. I want to have it now if you're willing." Veen said, "Yes." Thessaly said, "We've been expecting it." He said, "Yes. I thought you might be." He said, "At the 3rd week's meal, I said I was single in the context of a conversation about your partnership tradition. I understand that in the solving framework that statement has a specific meaning that is different from the meaning I intended, which was a casual conversational contribution. I understand that the meaning the statement has in your framework is a declaration of availability for the compatibility evaluation. I understand that the past week has been the compatibility evaluation. I want to say all of that to you directly so that we are in the same understanding before we have the conversation about what comes next. Veen said, "Yes, that's the accurate account," Thessaly said. "We knew the statement may not have been intended in the Sorvin sense," he said, "and you evaluated whether to proceed as if it were intentional or to note the possible misunderstanding and not proceed." Veen said, "Yes," he said, "and you chose to proceed." Thessaly said, "We found you interesting." He said, "Yes. I'm glad you found me interesting. I also want to understand what the choice to proceed means, because the choice was made based on the statement's meaning in your framework, and I want to understand the full weight of the meaning before I decide whether I'm in it intentionally or whether I'm still in it by accident." Veen said, "That's the question the evaluation is designed to produce." He said, "The evaluation produces the question of whether I'm in it intentionally." Veen said, "The evaluation produces the evidence for whether you have the qualities the partnership requires." "The question is separate." He said, "Tell me the qualities." Thessaly said, "The Sorvin partnership tradition identifies 4 qualities. The first is genuine curiosity, the curiosity that is present because the thing is interesting rather than because the curiosity is useful." Veen said, "The second is the capacity for honesty about difficulty, not the performance of honesty, the actual willingness to say the difficult thing when the difficult thing is the accurate thing." Thessaly said, "The third is the ability to be in uncertainty, without requiring the uncertainty to resolve immediately. The partnership tradition involves a significant period of the shape being unknown. The partner who requires the shape to be known prematurely produces a different kind of relationship from the one the tradition intends." Veen said, "The fourth is the attentiveness that comes from genuine interest rather than obligation. The Sorvin partnership is a significant relationship. The partner whose attentiveness is obligatory is present differently from the partner whose attentiveness is interested." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "And the week's activities," Thessaly said, "were designed to produce evidence for the 4 qualities' presence or absence." He said, "The observation deck's significant conversation." Veen said, "The capacity for honesty about difficulty. The choices you described, the shift from the technical function to the cultural liaison function. The account was honest about the difficulty of the choice in a way that people who are performing honesty don't typically achieve." He said, "The collaborative meal," Thessaly said, "genuine curiosity and the ability to be in uncertainty. You engaged with the combination of traditions without requiring the result to be determined in advance. You were interested in what the combination would produce rather than in confirming what you expected it to produce." He said, "And the questions in the morning sessions." Veen said, "The attentiveness quality. We asked you questions about yourself that were not the exchange functions questions. The attentiveness quality is visible in how a person receives that category of question. Whether the attention in the answer is the attention of someone who is genuinely in the self-examination, or the attention of someone who is producing a self-presentation." He said, "What did the examination of my answers produce?" Thessaly said, "Evidence for the presence of the attentiveness quality," he said, "and the overall evaluation." Veen said, "Is continuing." He said, "You told me this at the end of last week. You said you were still evaluating." Veen said, "Yes." He said, "I want to ask you something about the continuing evaluation." Thessaly said, "Yes." He said, "The evaluation is the tradition's mechanism for determining whether I have the qualities the partnership requires. But the partnership is a significant relationship that requires both parties to choose it. The evaluation determines whether I'm a candidate. It doesn't determine whether I'm a willing candidate." Veen said, "Yes." He said, "The evaluation was initiated based on a statement I made without understanding its significance. I'm not objecting to the evaluation. The week has been genuinely interesting, and the activities have been activities I would have chosen. But I want to be in the evaluation as someone who understands what the evaluation is rather than as someone who is in it by accident. Thessaly said, "Yes," he said, "so I want to ask you directly, what does the partnership mean? Not the evaluation, the partnership itself. What is it?" They looked at each other. He had been observing the twin bonds expression for 3 weeks, and he had developed a reading of the specific exchange of the 27-year bond. The efficiency, the reference framework, the quality of the communication that didn't need words because the words were already shared. The exchange that Thessaly and Veen had in the observation documentation room's morning light was a long one by the standards of their usual exchanges. It was approximately 4 seconds. Veen said, "The Sorving partnership is the relationship that adds to the twin bond without replacing it. The partner is not the substitute for the twin. The twin bond is not a relationship that requires substitution and cannot be substituted. The partner is the addition." Thessaly said, "The twin bond is the foundational relationship. It is the relationship from which we understand everything else. The partner is the person who is in relationship with the bond, with both of us as the unity we are, and who is also in relationship with each of us as the individuals we are within the unity." Veen said, "The partner is the person who understands that the bond is not the barrier, and who is genuinely in the relationship with the bond's full character, rather than with the simplified version that treats us as 2 separate individuals who happen to be close." Thessaly said, "The partner who treats us as 2 separate individuals is missing the foundational thing. The partner who is only in relationship with the bond as a unity and not with us as individuals is also missing the foundational thing." Veen said, "The partner who can be genuinely in both simultaneously is the partner the tradition is looking for." He said, "And the evaluation tests whether I can do that." Thessaly said, "The evaluation tests whether you have the qualities that make it possible. The doing of it is the partnership itself," he said, "which I haven't done yet." Veen said, "No, you've been in the evaluation. The evaluation is not the partnership." He said, "And if the evaluation concludes that I have the qualities." Thessaly said, "We would offer the partnership invitation," he said, "and I would accept or decline." Veen said, "Yes," he said, "and I can accept or decline based on my own understanding rather than on the misunderstanding of the original statement." Thessaly said, "Yes. The original statement's significance in our framework does not obligate you. It opened the evaluation. The evaluation's conclusion and the partnership invitation's acceptance are separate steps." He said, "Yes." He said it in the quality of someone who was in the full understanding of what they were in, and who was in the understanding's presence. Not the managed presence of someone who had processed the understanding and organized it into the appropriate response. The actual presence of someone who was in the real thing and was attending to the real thing. He said, "I want to continue the evaluation." Veen said, "You're already continuing it." He said, "I want to continue it knowing what it is." Thessaly said, "Yes. That changes the quality." He said, "I think so too." Chapter 4. The remaining 3 weeks of the first month had the quality of the third week's activities after the clarifying conversation. The quality of activities that were both the evaluation's continuation and, increasingly, the thing that the evaluation was the beginning of. He had been in the evaluation for a week without knowing he was in it, and had been in it for 3 more weeks knowing he was in it. And the difference between the two was the difference that the clarifying conversation had produced, which was the difference between being interesting to them as an observed subject and being interesting to them as a person who was attending to his own being in the thing. The attending to his own being in the thing was what the second and third weeks had added. He had found in the attending that the qualities the evaluation was evaluating were not qualities he was performing for the evaluation. They were qualities that were present in him, and that the evaluation's specific design was revealing to him by creating the contexts in which they were visible. He was genuinely curious. He had found this true about himself before the evaluation, and the evaluation was confirming it in the specific contexts the evaluation's activities created. He had the capacity for honesty about difficulty. The conversation on the observation deck about the choice to shift from the technical to the cultural liaison function had not been a performance of honesty. It had been the honesty that the conversation's quality had produced, because the conversation was genuinely asking. The ability to be in uncertainty without requiring the uncertainty to resolve. This was the quality he was least certain he had, and the evaluation's third week's activities had been the activities that produced the most evidence for its presence, which was the evidence produced by the specific uncertainty of being in the evaluation knowing it was the evaluation. He had been in the uncertainty of the evaluation. The uncertainty of a thing whose shape he did not know, and whose conclusion he could not determine, and which he was in regardless. And he had been in it with the quality of someone who was genuinely present in the uncertainty, rather than managing it into a form he could control. This was the quality that Veen had noted on the fourth day of the third week when she said, "You're not trying to determine what we want the evaluation to find." He said, "I'm not performing the evaluation." She said, "Most people who understand they're being evaluated perform for the evaluation." He said, "I understand what the evaluation is for. If I perform the qualities rather than have them, the partnership would be built on the performance rather than the qualities. The performance degrades. The partnership based on the performance would degrade with it." She said, "Yes," he said, "and I would rather know that I don't have the qualities than build something on the performance of having them." She said, "Yes." Thessaly said, "That's the fourth quality." He said, "The attentiveness." Thessaly said, "The attentiveness that comes from genuine interest rather than obligation. You're genuinely interested in whether you're suitable for the partnership, not interested in being found suitable, interested in whether the suitability is real." He said, "There's a difference." Thessaly said, "Yes," he said, "the person interested in being found suitable performs the qualities. The person interested in whether the qualities are real examines them." Veen said, "Yes," he said, "I'm examining them." Veen said, "Yes, we can see that." The fourth week's first day had the conversation about the twin bond that he had been building toward since the clarifying conversation. The conversation he had known was necessary, and which he had been waiting to have until he had enough of the direct experience to have it from the experience rather than from the briefing. He said, "I want to understand the twin bond's character as you experience it, not the structural description, the actual quality of what the bond is." Thessaly said, "The bond is not a choice. That's the first thing. It's not a chosen relationship, it's the foundational condition. I have been in this bond since before I had the capacity to choose anything, and the bond is not something I chose and is not something I maintain. It exists." Veen said, "The bond's existence is not like the existence of other relationships. Other relationships exist because they're maintained. The maintenance is the relationship's continuity. The bond exists because it's the bond. Its continuity is not the product of maintenance." He said, "And the partner's relationship to the bond." Thessaly said, "The partner who treats the bond as a competitor, who requires the bond to be smaller to make space for the partnership, is the partner who has misunderstood the bond's character. The bond cannot be made smaller. Requiring it to be smaller doesn't make it smaller. It makes the partnership not fit." Veen said, "The partner who understands that the bond is the foundation, who builds the partnership on the foundation rather than competing with it, is the partner who is actually in the relationship with the twins and not in a relationship with the idea of the twins." He said, "I want to ask you something." They said, "Yes." He said, "In the partnership, the partner is in relationship with both of you as a unity and as individuals. What does that look like?" Thessaly said, "It looks like what this week has looked like." He said, "The activities." Veen said, "The activities that were with both of us and the activities that were with each of us separately. The observation deck was all three of us. The collaborative meal was all three of us. But on the second day, I asked you about the technical functions, documentation methodology, and Thessaly was in the documentation room working, and that conversation was ours. He said, yes. Veen said. And on the fourth day, Thessaly asked you to help with the star cluster's observation log transcription, and I was in the session preparation, and that was theirs. He said, yes. Thessaly said, the partnership is not always all three of us at once. The partnership is the relationship that holds both, the unity and the individual. The partner who can only be in one of those is not in the full partnership, he said, and the partner who is in both. Veen said, is the partner the tradition is designed to find? He said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I want to tell you something that is not the evaluation's question but is adjacent to it. They said, yes, he said. I have been in relationships in the human framework. The human relational framework is built for the dyad, the two-person partnership that is the human cultural norm. I'm not describing this as a limitation I'm trying to overcome. I'm describing it as the context from which I'm in this conversation. Thessaly said, yes. He said, the Sorvin partnership is not a dyad. It's a triad that isn't a triad in the way that three separate individuals would constitute a triad. It's a dyad plus one, where the dyad is the foundational bond and the one is the addition. That's a different structure from anything the human cultural framework has as a model. Veen said, yes. He said, and I'm finding in the past 3 weeks that the absence of a model is not the obstacle I would have expected it to be. Thessaly said, why not? He said, because the model's function is to tell you what the shape of the thing is in advance. And the evaluation's function, and now I understand this in the full sense, is to build the shape from the qualities of the people in it rather than from the model. The absence of the human framework's model is the absence of the wrong shape being imposed on the right thing. Veen was quiet. Thessaly was quiet. He said, I may be wrong about that. I'm saying it as the observation from 3 weeks of being in the thing rather than as a conclusion. Veen said, you're not wrong. Thessaly said, the model's absence is not a deficiency. The absence is the con.